do something relaxing. It's just now 4 o'clock. Let's give everyone, Sarah, maybe about 2 more minutes, because I am, based on RSVPs, probably expecting 2 more. I do know we have one that will be joining us late. He sent us a note. So let's give it about 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Okay, everybody, I think we can probably get started here. Let's see, I think we've got most of our committee members here. We welcome to all of you. We've got a lot of staff folks sitting on the call. Of course, we've got the TSW team here as well. And it looks like we have a couple folks from the public listening in today, 3 at the moment. So we can go ahead and get started. I cannot believe, first of all, it is Labor Day has shown up. In some ways, it feels like we never get to this part of the year. In other ways, it's gone by really quickly. And with that, we are already in week number 3 of our first conceptual plans being rolled out. And this week, we're going to be going over North Springs. So again, seems like just a couple weeks ago, this was something we look forward to, and we're as a committee, we're over the halfway point, and we are getting lots of comments online. I wanted to say we're actually getting a lot of folks who are using the social pinpoint system. Sarah's been giving us updates on how many folks and how many people are using that. And I think it's been fairly successful. Although, to be clear, we have had some folks that have contacted us and said, I'm having trouble, how do I do this? How do I get my information in? And for anyone that's listening, you can just send your comments directly to us or to Sarah. We'll make sure that they get incorporated. So don't be afraid if the technology doesn't seem to be working for you, that your comments cannot be heard. So with that, I'm just going to let Sarah take it away and lead us through like she did last week, and did a great job.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for bearing with us during this 3rd meeting. We're going to go through North River Village today. And if I can click in here, there we go. Okay. So the agenda will be to just kind of go over the same stuff we've gone over each week, just to have as a refresher with some of the site analysis, general market study results, outreach major themes, and then I'll pass it to Bill for the site plans and then the next steps. So we have the 4 redevelopment sites. We'll be going over North River, which is the northernmost site closest to Chattahoochee River. We've gone through Northridge and River Springs at this point, and then North Springs, which is the former Big Lots, will be next week. So as a reminder of what this plan is, we are creating conceptual but feasible ideas. Nothing that we are drawing is set in stone, and more than likely, if something is redeveloped, it won't look exactly like what we've drawn. So what we're doing is creating models for redeveloping underutilized commercial centers within the North End. And we want to understand the community's preferences for future redevelopment. So while we are kind of touching upon zoning code changes that may be needed, we're not doing a full-blown zoning exercise where we're rewriting the code. We're just making recommendations for how to make the site plans financially feasible. And we are, again, not creating a final design for all 4 sites. All of them will have 3 concepts, and they will likely be changed based on the public input we've received online. So where we are in the process, we're in the middle of the concept plan development. We've done all the draft plans. We're getting the online feedback. We'll make revisions and then come back for additional feedback and create our more finalized renderings. And then we'll have a final open house to kind of unveil all of that with our implementation and some of the more detailed financial information. And then after that, we'll have our final report document, ideally by the end of the year, with council adoption. Just as a refresher with the market study, the demand for office and retail in the area is very limited, particularly without additional housing units. We have a pretty big demand for owner-occupied and renter-occupied units in the North End, and adding new households within the North End could create additional retail space demand, but most of the commercial development will be reorganizing space that's already there. Some of the feedback themes we've gotten so far from the kickoff meeting back in March, our online engagement that took place in, I guess it was June, and then some of our stakeholder interviews. The main things we've been hearing a lot of things, but the main things are that we need a mix of housing options that are attainable at many price points, so that, you know, teachers, police officers, firemen, all of you know, our employees can live in the North End. There's a big desire for parks, plazas, green spaces, and connecting all of those through trails. A desire for mixed use with residential and retail offerings, and then keeping the buildings relatively low to mid-rise, not taller than 5 to 6 stories. Although some of the online input we've gotten about a couple of the sites based off of where they are located and what they are adjacent to, people have been a little more comfortable going up to 8 to 10 floors, but that's purely because of where they're located. And then we've just realized through a lot of our input that many people have noted the North Springs Center, which is the Big Lots one we're going over next week, may have the most opportunity for creative redevelopment and creating kind of a gateway into the North End. So with our concept plans, we each of them have 3 potential site plans. One is based on the existing code, one makes minor changes to the existing code, and then the third one does not take the development code into as much consideration. So, but even with all of that information and all of the changes we can make and the design recommendations we can make, it is really important to make sure that Roswell Road is made walkable, bikeable, and safe for drivers. These piecemeal redevelopments won't work as well if the connection between them isn't as strong. And we just need to make sure that we keep reiterating how important it is to change North Roswell Road. So with that, I'll pass it over to Bill to go through the concept plans.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. I think we all understand, having not been attending on the last 2 site reviews, I'm going to try to make this brief, which I think is the goal here, and then we'll come back and answer any questions that people may have. The graphic that you see here shows the site as it was originally defined, which was 11.2 acres. And north is up here, of course. And in initial looks at this, we've confirmed that there's 2 additional, what were originally thought to be out parcels, 2 additional pieces of land that are going to be included in the site. One of them is the existing bank site that you see here to the north, and the other one is the triangular parcel that's down at the south end of the site. And together, those actually increase the overall site acreage to about 12.7 acres. But You also see the adjacent multifamily residential development to the east, and although it's been made clear, I think, for the purposes of this study, that we're not looking at changing or eliminating any of the existing condominium units that are in that development. There is some vacant land there within that area that we have chosen to look at that could possibly allow for interparcel connectivity. So you'll see that here in just a minute. The other points, notably, there are 7 existing tenants, and so that is a real constraint on this site, which is a bit different than some of the other shopping center sites that we're looking at. These are leases that have been signed recently, and some of them may endure for 10 or more years. So I think it's fair to say that any redevelopment that happens on this site is likely to be to happen over a period of time, and may in fact be what I would call incremental development. And so we'll be talking about that. I'm happy to see that Jonathan Gelber of Blakely Advisory Group is available. Hey, Jonathan. So that if questions come up about economics and some of the decisions that have been made here, he can perhaps address those. But if we go over the assumptions that have been made here in these plans, you'll see, as I mentioned, the first bullet point is that those existing tenants and occupancies may not change anytime soon. We talked about the additional sites that have been added, and the potential for connectivity to the site, which is now at the bottom of the screen, but to the east of the existing center. And one of the things that is not really addressed in the plans, but I think is very much a reality and would need to be incorporated in whatever ultimate plans are drawn, is the potential for connection to the river. And that would most likely happen, at least in part, along the Roswell Road corridor, which is, again, all the more reason why the improvements to that roadway, as Sarah was talking, are important. Next slide, Sarah. So what you're going to see, as she explained, are 3 different schemes. In this site, we've interpreted that assignment slightly differently than the others, again, because of the importance of keeping existing tenants here. And so, excuse me. So the first option 1, which is the lowest density option that we are suggesting might be viable, would be to choose a portion of the site, the parking field that's there today, that perhaps is least necessary to support those existing tenant uses, and do a first increment of redevelopment. So this scheme shows 1 block of what you'll see in subsequent plans that could become a multi-block plan. But this particular block, which shows mixed use, including multi-unit residential of about 150 units, and then additional commercial space, both in that new block as well as the potential for, for a second floor development of what is called out here as the food hall location, which is essentially a piece of the existing shopping center site, which has a bit of a mall or a court space in the middle of it already. That this would be a viable and, in fact, a beneficial way to begin developing this site, and it would not take away from the viability of the existing uses. Caffeine and Octane, the coffee house on the north end, this would retain a parking field that they could use for their events, and then the remaining parking to the south or to the left in this graphic could serve the other uses. And the triangular parcel that's immediately to the far south here would remain as it exists today as well. So that's one way to look at what we would call option one, the lowest density scenario. The challenges that we would address, we would face here are going to be common to all of these projects, in that when codes call for ground floor use of multi-unit buildings to be commercial, that quite often means that it provides an overabundance of commercial space that cannot be supported. And I think that could be the case here as well. So that's something that we'd have to look at carefully. Building height limits, I think this initial phase would fit within the 5 to 6 story sort of range. So that's probably comfortable. But the current street standards that would need to be imposed to provide for new accessibility, even for this first block of development, might be overly wide. And so we would probably want to look at narrowing up those street width requirements as they are currently written. Okay, next scheme, which is what we'll call option 2. Oh, you wanted to, I'm sorry, let me pause for a minute. And Sarah, we were going to do
yeah, quick poll question.
poll questions. Yeah.
So we just, similar to last week, would like the advisory committee to grade the concept plan for how appropriate it is for the site. Andrea, do we know how many are on the call?
Yes, right now I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 committee members that should be on right now.
Okay, so it looks like we're just waiting on one more.
While we're waiting, I will just maybe clarify that that block of infill development, it's not detailed in the drawing, but it does incorporate its own internal parking that would serve those new residential units. So we're not depending on the existing surface parking for that use. This would self-park.
Sarah, I think you're just probably going to have to move forward with the 6 we have.
All right. All right. Looks like C to F for this one. And maybe that's just because it's primarily just a quick infill rather than redeveloping the whole site.
Okay, so let's now look at option what we'll call 2A, which builds upon the notion that we could begin with one block of mixed-use development in the relatively near term without necessarily displacing existing commercial uses on the site. And that is one of the blocks that you see in this plan. So this plan then proposes that a second block that would be similar in configuration and massing and scale be built to the south of the main entry drive that is currently the main entrance to the site. Of course, is another major entrance that's further north, which is also reflected here. And then the third entrance to the site coming from the south across the triangular parcel that's been added. And then there's actually a fourth access that comes in from the north as well, from the side. So this is more of a build-out plan for the entire site, and it anticipates a mix of housing types that ranges from, again, apartments or multi-unit development that would have a mixed base. In some places, you can see the cross-hatching in the two red blocks that represents where we would have commercial space that would front onto the interior streets. Once again, you see the blue so U-shaped building, which also showed up in the first option, which is that food hall piece that would really be kind of the activity focus and centerpiece of the neighborhood were it to be built out in this way. And then flanking that to the south and to the north and extending into those two added parcels that we mentioned, the branch bank and the triangle, we're showing townhouse development that would be typically alley-loaded townhomes, rear access garages with the fronts of those units, those townhomes facing out to the street or onto small pocket parks, as you see the block of townhouses, for example, on the south end that's facing onto the little triangular green space. And then in addition to that, you also see that to the east in the area that we talked about as potential infill within that existing condo property, there is room for a significant number of additional residential units, which we're suggesting could be a combination of both townhomes that would be purely residential use, and in some cases live-work units where we think they have sort of a presence and a street frontage that could potentially support a ground floor non-residential use within, say, a typical three-story townhouse kind of a configuration. But you're also seeing how the street system in this plan could be developed so that it does connect through all the way to the existing streets further to the east, and really start to knit that property into this redevelopment, both in terms of vehicular as well as pedestrian access. It's got a suggested hotel as one of the uses here is also, and a little bit of freestanding new retail. And so, as you can see, we've jumped from that initial increment of development at around 150 units to a plan that now is around 401 units, which over the total gross acreage of that site, that's around 12.7 acres, that's it's over 30 units to the acre, 32 or so. And what we learned from Bleakley work that we started with on these projects is that we probably need to be, or to get into the range of 25 to 40 units per acre if we are going to be able to, economically make this redevelopment viable. And so we're certainly into that range with this plan. However, I will also point out, and we may choose to discuss this later, that of all the sites that we've looked at, all four of the sites, the land values here are probably arguably higher than elsewhere, partly because it's still a viable project, and it would require just a lot a bigger differential in value to justify displacing those existing revenue generating tenants. So we'll look at the next scheme in a moment that jumps up to yet a little bit higher density. But when we look at the challenges that this plan presents, it's the ones that we mentioned previously, but we would also want to look at the possibility of the code enabling live-work units. We would like to look at the possibility, again, with this more urban format of development, permitting smaller lot sizes for townhomes and for those live-work units. What's drawn here is about a 20-foot wide townhouse, which is pretty typical in this kind of a setting. Once again, we talked about the street width being an issue, and it becomes more so as we add additional internal streets as we're doing here. And then because we're now looking at the potential, at least, for going to taller buildings, certainly more than 3 stories, in order to make that multi-unit development cost effective, we would want to look at eliminating the current restrictions that require steel or concrete frame for such development. Sarah, I'll kick it back to you.
All righty. I'm going to launch the same poll question, but for this concept plan to grade it.
Hey, did all of our committee members vote?
Looks like we're looking for.
There we go. Thank you.
All right. Looks like this one did a little bit better, but we'll see how the next 2 turn out.
Okay. As I said, we're now looking at if we did, or if a developer did feel that additional density was required in order to make this kind of redevelopment make sense economically. This suggests one way that could happen, which would be to take the 2 areas that are highlighted with the red dashed lines here, which are currently shown in the previous plan to be townhomes, and to convert those 2 blocks to additional, what I will loosely refer to as sort of a Texas wrap style of a multi-unit development, where there's either a podium under the building or there is a parking structure in the middle of the block, as is the case in the bigger box that you see in red at the north end of the site. And so that begins to create more of an overall 6-story scale for the perimeter of the project. The hotel might be somewhat lower than that. There would still be townhomes as transitional use at the back and at the edges of the site to the existing residential. But again, these additional blocks of mixed use development that would have limited commercial use on the ground floor, where we think that it could live with viable street frontages, they would all be self-parked, each of these blocks. And so at the end of the day, this site is totally self-supporting in terms of its required parking. And it goes from around 400 units that we saw in the previous scheme of 2A up to around almost 600 units here with the conversion from townhomes to multifamily in these 2 blocks. The commercial use jumps up also a little bit in scale. It's still not a huge number. Overall, we're talking about around 40,000 square feet of retail space, commercial space. And the part of the site that is at the infill at the eastern edge in the existing condominium area would essentially remain unchanged in this plan. Once again, changes are not substantially different than the last scheme that you saw, because we've not really introduced any new parameters. We've just sort of changed up the intensity of development in a couple of places on the site.
Looks like we're just waiting on a couple more votes. All right. And this one fared better than the last one with a few more B responses.
Yeah, with that number of units, by the way, that would get us to an overall gross density of 47 units per acre, as opposed to the previous scheme that was 32. So when we talk about, where is that sweet spot that would really make it work, I think we're probably closer to hitting that point in this plan. It may be a more marketable plan. Finally, we wanted to see what would happen if we were going to try to intensify this site even further. And we looked at what potential sort of overall changes you might make to the site in order to achieve that. And there's certainly ways that you could imagine completely scraping this site and starting over. But I think all of these schemes have assumed that whatever happens here is likely, once again, to be somewhat phased, somewhat trying to respond to this timeline of existing tenants that are going to be cycling out of their leases over a period of time. So in all cases, the street framework for these plans has remained unchanged, because that street framework fundamentally works. And so this scheme simply looks at what would happen if we took 2 of those 4 mixed-use blocks and added additional floors. These are the 2 places where the plan most easily accommodates. In order to do this, of course, you have to add additional floors to the parking structures as well. And by the way, all of these plans have taken into account the fact that there is grade change in the site, and we're trying to use that grade change wherever we can to make the plan work best. But in no cases are we thinking that we're digging huge underground parking caverns, which certainly could be done, but those tend to be just prohibitively expensive. So by and large, our parking is at worst case half a level below existing grade, and then it's all sort of structured parking, that is built into the building itself above grade. But the point is that in these schemes, the ground floor uses wouldn't change really in terms of the commercial, but we could add another, maybe as many as another 150 residential units. So this scheme, as it's drawn, gets us up to 737, which is about 58 units per acre. So that just maybe gives you some indication of, when you tilt past that 5 to 6 story scale, what do you get? Certainly those upper floors that they would have pretty amazing views looking down to the river, although it's, it's a pretty good distance to the river actually from this site when you look at the map. But it would certainly be marketable, and a developer would be thrilled to be able to do that, I'm sure. So here, in addition to the other code changes that we would need to see, it would require relaxing the building height limits to permit 8 to 10 floors, obviously. And then beyond that, really, it's the same challenges that we've discussed on the previous plans.
Okay, so we'll have a couple more polls in a minute, just to clarify some things, and then we will talk in the Q&A about some of the discrepancies between some of the gradings and any other questions that we have. And here are more poll questions. That's where they're going to be. So first question is, do you agree with phasing redevelopment on this site given that many tenants occupy the building? Okay, looks like we've gotten all the votes there. Next one is, do you agree with directly connecting into the adjacent neighborhood to the east with similar housing units like townhomes and live work, and streets and pedestrian connections? Okay. Next one is, do you agree with adding mixed-use development, ground floor commercial with residential above on this site? All right, we got 100% agreement on that one. And then, do you agree with allowing taller buildings on this site up to 10 floors to accommodate more housing units and attainable housing?
Sarah, you reminded me that when you say attainable housing, obviously if the developer is allowed to build additional units, then I think the expectation that a larger number, maybe even a larger percentage of the units built would be in the affordable category. I think that would be a potential outcome for, you know, the higher density options. Mm-hmm. I meant to mention that.
Are we missing one vote? All the others had 7. So. All right, so we are essentially split down the middle on that one with yes and no. So we'll just finish out the presentation, then go through the Q&A. Next steps, you know, send us any comments you have on the site plans or participate on Social Pinpoint and do it that way. Those have been released today, this morning. And then we will revise the concept plans based on the public input and release the next version in the late fall. Our next advisory committee meeting will be next Monday at 4 p.m., the last one for this round. So hopefully we'll see you all there. Again, public input schedule, we've gone through Northridge and River Springs. We have North River available through next Sunday. And then last one, North Springs, the 14th through the 20th. So if we want to open it up for discussion, and I don't know if any Q&A came through or anything in the chat box.
Sarah, this is Andrea. Can I ask a leading question of the committee?
Sure thing.
Because I found it very interesting. First of all, I think in this round, it feels like that most people just kind of felt average about these particular concepts fitting in context with the surrounding area. And I'd like to understand from the committee, you know, why that is. And then secondly, I've also found it very interesting that in the first option, which again is allowed under the current zoning code, nobody seemed to be very excited about that one. So I'd like to, again, hear from the committee why that is.
Andrea?
Yes, Rhonda.
I'm happy to go first. And I think maybe it's because from a mindset perspective, some of us approach this in a little different way. I approach it from very much from a business perspective. And one of the first things that was noted was that none of this is adjacent to protected neighborhoods. So with respect to any sort of impacts and requirements under the current code for the transition buffers and the things that go along with that, that kind of goes out of my head and as my Council of Neighborhoods role. And then I look at this from a business perspective and I think, how is this going to be? And again, I know we kind of talk about feasibility. How are we going to get there with a feasibility perspective under probably the current ownership to ask them to incentivize them to make these kinds of changes? I don't think you're going to find someone's going to be able to pick up that center and make a simple change like that and be able to realize a return that is meaningful for them. And I know there's other factors that go into this conversation, like long-term tenancy and things of that nature. So we're really grappling with several obstacles, but I'm really going with feasibility. And my business head says, you got to get density on the ground or else nobody's going to be able to make that happen. And that really is why I graded that one, you know, that was the one that to me fit the site the least, just because my business perspective is, you know, how is someone going to maximize their investment in this property? Thank you, that's perfect. And that to me is, you know, you lean all the way over to the right there on option 2C. And I have another challenge that I want to ask a question about, but if this is leading you where you want to go to talk about this, let's go there.
Rhonda, you have the floor.
Yeah.
I mean, again, option 1, I just don't see that as something that anyone could optimize their investment with. And if Stream were to want to optimize their investment there, that's all well and good. I don't know that, you know, what would incentivize them to do that at this point. As a general statement, that property is available at the right price at any moment in time in Stream Realty's mind. That's on the market. Even if it's not on the market and you couldn't find it in a Google search as that's, you know, North River Plaza for sale, it's for sale at the right price. And again, I don't see feasibility there. I'm a little concerned. I like as the density gets farther and farther over to the right there, and I love the idea of giving people height and possible river views, which without looking at the topo lines on the map, I don't know if you could get there, considering the tree density, the canopy along Roberts Drive. But I have a fear about talking about pushing townhomes into Winding River. You've got fractured ownership back there. And the one thing that I can't find, which I'm looking for, and maybe Andrea or someone from community development might be able to help, I can't find the original zoning for that property. It's not on the community development GIS map. And our current code asks for any reservations of open space to remain as open space. One of the criteria under the retention of conditions for zoning was traffic and transportation, green space, and I think there's one more that doesn't come to mind. If those requirements were in the conditions for the zoning of that property, they remain. So I don't know if y'all were able to dig up the zoning from that property, but they may have a green space requirement and that's the reason why that space is open.
Okay, good point, Rhonda. We'll have to take a close look at that
Yeah,
for the next
I
version.
couldn't find it. And just as an aside, you're probably going to have to ask more than one person whether or not you can attain that property. If it's common open space, then that's a condo property. Every condo owner gets a vote. So you're going to talk about however many 100 units are on that property, getting a vote to decide whether or not they want to part with that property.
Andrea, Rhonda, may I respond to a couple
Oh,
of those
please
points?
do. Please do. Please do.
Okay, thanks. As for, I think everything you said is great observations. And to be quite honest, it's been a little difficult to get a real clear picture from Stream Realty about what they themselves would really entertain doing in terms of redeveloping their site. They bought this property with the intention of doing that, and so they were not able to get the plan that they originally wanted to develop here to work for a variety of reasons, as I understand it. And so, because of that, they went ahead and firmed up on some leases, and we were told, that, for example, Stars and Stripes, was a hard lease and a hard user, and it may be that that's changed. It certainly seems that that's the case since they gave us those comments. But they did seem to be receptive to the idea of infill development on the site. They said, look, if show us what you're talking about, and if we think it doesn't cannibalize the existing retail, we can still make that work. Yeah, absolutely. We'd be all about adding value to our existing investment there. So whether this, option one block is absolutely the right place to start or not, is for them or someone else to say. But, part of the reason we did it here was so that building can begin to define and enclose the little square that you see sort of that's sandwiched in between that and the food court or the food hall space to the east. So that really begins to do some placemaking on the site. So that would be my comments to there. As far as the infill on the condo site, I think you're right. We have no idea whether those owners would entertain what we're proposing here, except that I'll point out that most of the sites that we're showing as development, not all of them, and we have to get in the weeds a little bit to make the distinctions, but there have been previous building footprints on that site, and I don't know if they burned or how they came to be removed, but you can see the underlying sort of structure of parking lots and building foundations that were once on that property, primarily on the southern end of it. And so as to whether we could make the open space requirements work, that's a great question. But I also would have to assume that if those condo owners are responsible for maintaining all of that green space, including the clubhouse they have, which looks like it needs some help, that having some revenue from redevelopment wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing.
Probably. That's certainly a valid argument.
But I don't know what the existing zoning is. And I do think you're right. That's something that would need to look at if we were going to get serious about trying to pursue that idea.
Other committee comments? Want to hear from you.
I have a random question, just because I'm looking at this with my business hat on, my business hat. What are the opportunities for us to review, once you drill all the way down, to review pro formas and see what those mean in terms of what we think is feasible?
The next iteration, we will have more of that financial information available that shows the more detailed feasibility for each site.
Yeah, I can address that if you like.
Sure.
So we have come up with so essentially when you look at this with 4 sites and 3 iterations in each site, we have about 12 to 16 sets of pro formas to generate. And for each one, we're looking at what if it's purely market rate and what if it's partially affordable housing. So we've now finally developed and tested the first set of pro formas, and that seems to work for the first site and the first 2 conditions of market and affordable. And now over the next week, we're going to rerun that 15 different times till we have a full set of these, and we'll go over the numbers. But I want to caution you that, well, essentially these spreadsheets are going to be very complicated, and they're going to have a little number at the end that says, based on this land price, this is either feasible or not feasible. It's not going to be a community exercise where we can all get our hands dirty and say, how can we change this cost? How can we change that cost? How can we change the density and use mix to end up coming with something that works? That might be an add-on or something that a developer does, but it's not, what I'm trying to say in short is that development and finance is not a community exercise.
No, we don't get to play Monopoly. I get it. I totally get it. Yeah, no, I get it. I totally get that. It's just a matter of taking a look at those and understanding, what the numbers are. And, I think there is a place at least for a conversation just to understand, where you see the feasibility based on all these numbers you're going to put together.
Right. Well, so we are scheduled. We're going to have an internal meeting on that on the 21st, and there will be a couple of revisions or hiccups after that, but we'll be ready to roll those out in the later part of the month. But one tricky thing is, though, land cost is not a fixed thing. You can't say what is the market price of this land, because if you looking at these things on screen, if you show the developer option 1 and say how much would you be willing to pay for that land, and show them option 2C and say how much are you willing to pay for that land, that's 2 entirely different questions there. So we can see recent sales, what similar shopping centers in the area have sold for. And so we know under the current market, that's what the going rate is. And we can take a guess at what somebody might offer or take for one of these sites, but really it is not a done deal until the deal is done.
Right, of course, until the ink is dry. I get that. And understanding not even just what someone's willing to pay, it's what someone like Stream Realty is willing to accept.
Right.
We don't understand all the underpinnings that go along with all of these sites with respect to what their numbers are, and particularly when you talk about Stream Realty's ownership, their properties, they bought a whole mixed bag of stuff from MIMS. So we don't. When you look at, if you look online on the tax assessor site and it says they paid $4 million for this property, that isn't real. That's not a real number. It was a multi-parcel deal, and that's just what they allocated to this site. So that number is meaningless in the scheme of the business deal and how it'll get done for them with respect to what they're going to want for it.
Yeah, and one war story I would like to relate is we've been working on a similar project for years and years and years up in Gwinnett County. And during the crazy real estate bubble days of 2006 or something, some developer and landowner proposed an idea to build a 28-story luxury condo tower on the middle of a shopping center in Gwinnett County. And of course, that deal fell through. But ever since then, the number of what would this property be worth with a 28-story luxury condo, that number has been sticking a pin in the ground. And so anybody who comes to that site and makes a reasonable offer says, well, we saw this plan a while back. that had a 28-story luxury condo on it. So we're going to use that as our benchmark. So that's when you show stuff too crazy dense here, that it might get people in the mindset of, oh, this is what this property is now worth.
Right.
You got to be careful there.
No, I understand. Believe me, I understand completely.
Good, thank you. We did have a question in the chat, just wondering about, what were any plans to alter the intersection of Roswell Road, where it enters Roswell. I don't really know of any plans there on Roswell, but the city, Sandy Springs, on our side, we are currently outside of this conceptual plan process, although related to it. We are working on some options for improving Roswell Road in this general vicinity. I don't have the date sitting in front of me, but I believe we will have an RFP out on the street in the next couple of weeks that are looking at design options for that. So on our side, the city side, we do have some options for making some improvements, potentially a traffic light in this area, regardless of what option may be chosen.
I can address that, Andrea. There is a full-blown plan to redo the entire intersection on the other side of the bridge. It'll become an over-under. Roswell Road goes over and everything else goes under. Azalea Drive, Riverside Road goes under. It's a huge, they're already in conversations for right-of-way acquisitions from the existing businesses just north of there. And it's actually a really cool looking project if you are interested in taking a look at it.
Thank you. Any other comments from our panelists? Anybody feel strongly for or against any of these concepts?
Hi, Andrea. Darius, I'm just going to chime in that option one,
Sure.
Just strongly against it because, well, I understand it as a footholder to start the development to 2A, 2B, 2C. Great idea, but alone, I don't see that being worth it. Would also like to see in the options of 2A, B, C, if there is limitations that the Winding River community places on that redevelopment, what would it look like if it's only, the community only allows the connectivity without the development on it? So let's say there's a limitation of open space. So I see there's the townhomes in those open space areas. If it's limited to open space and the connectivity, is there in between that can be shown?
Okay. That is, again, I think those are very good comments about that other piece of property beyond the shopping center. So I think we'll have to address that in the next version. Good point.
Andrea, and if I may, I'm not sure who was just speaking. Who was that? Sorry.
It's Darius.
Darius, hey. Yeah, this probably isn't entirely clear. Options 2A, 2B, and 2C were really the three intensity options, if you will. And we drew option one as much as anything else just to sort of illustrate the idea of incremental development. So it may be that when we present this in its final form, we shouldn't even call it an option, because I think you're right that as a standalone kind of proposition, it may not make a whole lot of sense. But we were hoping, without getting into a whole lot of really complicated graphics showing, here's how this site would morph over time, with this block and then the next block and so forth. This is just to sort of get people to think about the fact that, yeah, you could build a piece of this and the rest of it could work, pretty much as it does today. So I don't know if that helps at all, Darius, but that was part of the intent.
Well, and I've got a question, Darius. This is Steve. Does Winding River own, how are we outside the confines of the original concept? Does Winding River own where they're showing, and I'm just looking at option 2A, where this additional housing encroaches in on y'all's neighborhood? Do you guys own that?
Yes, Winding River. So if you're looking at option 2A, there are 3 rows of townhomes to the bottom left. and that little townhome to the bottom right, those are on Winding River property.
So we would be, so how did we get to bleeding into the Winding River property?
Steve, this is Andrea, I can address that. So again,
Good.
back to kind of what Bill was just trying to say, our intent in showing that was not to say that you have to include that piece of property to make this a successful development. It was more of we're trying to show you in the future the options for, additional development in the area. And that was a staff call. So that was probably, looking back on it, hindsight being 2020, maybe a little confusing. So I think we'll have some more discussion on it between ourselves and TSW, but I think we probably just better remove that and treat it
Yes,
like
so
we did on the
Darius,
other area.
When you start getting phone calls, just let them know that highly conceptual obviously would be a very collaborative effort between, quite honestly, whoever the developer is, if they even consider doing something like that, and
Absolutely.
you guys in Winding River. So I don't want anybody to think that we're coming in to take your land. Does that make
That's
sense?
a very good point, Steve. And Darius, if you get a lot of questions from your constituents, please just send them directly to me.
And Darius, let me ask as well, this is Bill, that if you know that site, way better than any of the rest of us do, obviously. So if there are pieces of this idea that you think could make some sense, as I said, it looks to me like, for example, the townhouses that are in the southernmost portion of that site, that's basically where it looks like there was a previous building footprint. If there's pieces that you think could make sense and would actually enhance the community, and other pieces that you think need to stay as they are because that's important green space, that all of that input I think would be very useful in trying to finalize this.
I agree.
I would be happy to help you out there.
This has been good discussion. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Okay, well, with that, if we don't have any additional comments or anybody who wants to actually have some discussion, again, there is an opportunity for you to send some of your written comments in or get on the site and make your comments known as well. But Sarah, with that, if you want to wrap us up.
All right. Well, thanks everyone again for your time. We look forward to presenting the last one next week. And please make sure that if you do have some thoughts that come to your mind, that you work on the social pinpoint and provide your comments or email us. But have a good rest
Yeah, and I
of your
know this is a lot of work for our committee members, so I just want to make sure that we give you the proper thank you for sitting with us now for 3 weeks in a row, and next week during the 4th week. This is a labor of love, and that you're giving back to your community. So you're our highly paid, not paid volunteers, and so we really appreciate all of your time and input on this process.
All right.
Thank you all. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.